Claire Williams returned to the Morrison Ranch on a crisp Friday evening in October, her belongings packed into an old sedan that had seen better days but still ran reliably. Jake had spent the week preparing the guest bedroom, cleaning windows, and trying to see his home through the eyes of someone who might judge his housekeeping skills. Emma had insisted on picking wildflowers for Claire's room, while Lucy had drawn a welcome picture featuring stick figures of their family, with a new person added who had exceptionally long brown hair. The first few days were an adjustment period for everyone. Claire moved through the house with quiet efficiency, learning the routines and rhythms of the Morrison family while establishing her own place within them. She woke early to help Emma get ready for school, braiding the girls' hair into neat styles that held up throughout the day. She taught Lucy songs while they prepared simple lunches, and she organized closets with a practical eye toward what the girls had outgrown and what they would need for the approaching winter. Most importantly, she listened. When Emma worried about a math test, Claire sat with her at the kitchen table and patiently worked through practice problems. When Lucy had nightmares about losing people she loved, Claire held her and talked about how loving someone means carrying them in your heart even when they're not physically present. She never tried to replace Sarah's memory, but instead helped the girls understand that loving their mother and accepting new care weren't contradictory choices. Jake watched these interactions with gratitude and something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. Claire had a gift for knowing when to step forward and when to step back, when the girls needed gentle correction and when they needed unconditional support. She treated them as individuals rather than generic children, learning Emma's tendency toward perfectionism and Lucy's need for physical affection. The practical improvements were immediately obvious. The house stayed cleaner without feeling sterile. Meals became more varied and nutritious without being complicated. Laundry got done regularly, and clothes were folded and put away instead of living in perpetual piles on the couch. Jake found himself coming home to the smell of something good cooking and the sound of female voices discussing the day's events. But it was the subtle changes that affected him most profoundly. Emma began laughing more, her serious little face relaxing into the carefree expressions appropriate for an 8-year-old. Lucy stopped searching the house for her mother every evening, though she still talked about Sarah regularly. The desperate edge that had characterized both girls since their mother's death gradually softened into something that looked remarkably like security. 3 weeks into Claire's residency, Jake realized that his own behavior was changing as well. He found himself hurrying through evening chores so he could join the family for dinner instead of eating alone after the girls were in bed. He began looking forward to the conversations that developed naturally as Claire helped him understand his daughter's perspectives and concerns. Her insights into their emotional needs were invaluable, but even beyond that, he discovered he genuinely enjoyed her company. Claire had opinions about everything from local politics to cattle breeding, and she wasn't shy about expressing them. She read voraciously, borrowing books from the town library and sharing interesting passages with Jake during their evening talks. She had traveled more than he might have expected, working for families in different states, and her stories of other places and people broadened his perspective on the world beyond the ranch. The arrangement also benefited Claire in ways that went beyond having a roof over her head. She seemed to bloom under the stability of the situation, her natural warmth emerging as she felt more secure. She mentioned plans for the future that extended beyond mere survival, talking about courses she might take through correspondence programs or skills she wanted to develop. The constant worry that had shadowed her eyes during their first meeting gradually disappeared. November brought the first serious snowfall, and with it a test of how well their unconventional family was working. Emma came down with a fever that lasted 3 days, and Claire never left her side, monitoring her temperature and keeping her comfortable while Jake handled both his own work and Emma's usual responsibilities. When Lucy inevitably caught the same illness, Claire managed 2 sick children with a calm competence that amazed Jake. During that difficult week, something shifted in the household dynamic. Jake found himself consulting Claire about decisions that went beyond childcare, asking her opinion on which cattle to sell and whether to invest in new equipment. Claire began making suggestions about improvements to the house and yard, speaking as if she expected to be there to see the results implemented. The girls started referring to their life before Claire, as if her presence had always been inevitable. The townspeople noticed the changes too. Mrs. Henderson remarked on how much happier the Morrison girls seemed, and the church ladies gradually stopped offering their pointed assistance now that Jake clearly had capable help at home. Some people whispered about the propriety of the arrangement, but most acknowledged that whatever was happening at the Morrison Ranch was working better than anyone had dared hope. It was Lucy who brought the unspoken questions to the surface. On a snowy December evening, as Claire helped her into her pajamas, the 5-year-old looked up with her characteristic directness and asked, "Claire, are you going to marry Daddy and be our real mama?" Claire froze, hairbrush halfway through Lucy's tangled locks. "Sweetie, that's not your daddy, and I have a working arrangement. I'm here to help take care of you and Emma, but that doesn't mean—" "But you love us," Lucy said with 5-year-old logic. "And Daddy smiles more when you're here. And Emma told me that sometimes people who aren't born into families can still become part of them." From the hallway, Jake heard the conversation and felt his heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. He hadn't realized how much his own feelings had evolved until Lucy's innocent question forced him to examine them. Somewhere between the daily domestic routines and the evening conversations, between watching Claire braid his daughter's hair and seeing her eyes light up when he shared ranch stories, his practical arrangement had become something much more complicated. Claire's response was gentle but clear. "I do love you and Emma very much. But loving someone and marrying their father are two different things. Your daddy hired me to help take care of your family, and that's what I'm doing. But what if you wanted to stay forever?" Lucy persisted. "What if we all wanted you to stay forever?" Jake stepped into the doorway, unable to pretend he hadn't been listening. Claire looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, while Lucy turned to him expectantly. "Lucy, you should let Claire finish getting you ready for bed," Jake said diplomatically. "We can talk about grown-up things later." After Lucy was tucked in and Emma had finished her homework, Jake and Claire found themselves alone in the kitchen with the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. Claire poured coffee for both of them, moving around the space with the familiarity of someone who had made it home. "She's not wrong, you know," Jake said finally, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "About you loving them. It shows in everything you do." Claire sat down across from him, choosing her words carefully. "They're easy children to love, Jake. They're bright and kind and resilient, and they deserve all the care and attention I can give them." "What about me?" The question slipped out before Jake could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than he had intended to show. Claire looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes reflecting the lamplight. "What about you? Do I deserve care and attention too? Or am I just the employer who provides the roof and the paycheck?" The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise her. "You're not just an employer, Jake. You haven't been for weeks." "Then what am I?" Claire was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if he had pushed too far, made the conversation too personal for their carefully maintained professional relationship. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "You're the man who took a chance on a stranger because he recognized that his children needed something he couldn't provide alone. You're the father who puts his daughter's welfare ahead of his own pride. You're the person who comes home every evening and asks about our day as if the answer actually matters to him." She paused, then continued more hesitantly. "And you're someone I've come to care about more than I probably should, considering our arrangement." Jake felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. "What if we changed our arrangement?" "What do you mean?" "What if instead of employer and employee, we became partners? Real partners in raising the girls and running the ranch and building something together that's bigger than what either of us could manage alone." Claire's eyes widened. "Jake, are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it," Jake said, surprised by his own certainty. "Not because Lucy thinks it's a good idea, and not because the town expects it, but because somewhere along the way I realized that I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I want you to stay, Claire, not as the hired help, but as my partner in everything." Claire stared at him, clearly struggling with emotions she hadn't expected to confront. "When I accepted your offer, I thought it was just about survival. A job, a place to live, a way to get back on my feet. And now, Now I can't imagine leaving, she admitted. This place, these girls, this life we've built together, it's become home in a way I never expected it could. But, Jake, marriage is a big step. Are you sure this isn't just gratitude or convenience? Jake stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard where his daughters had played that afternoon, while Claire watched from the porch, ready to intervene if needed, but confident enough in their safety to let them explore. 3 months ago, I was barely keeping my head above water, he said. The girls were struggling, the house was chaos, and I felt like I was failing at everything that mattered. You changed that, not just by doing the work, but by caring about the outcome. He turned back to face her. It's not gratitude, Claire. It's not convenience. It's the recognition that you've become essential to our family, and I'd like to make that official. I'd like the girls to have the security of knowing you're not going anywhere, and I'd like to have the right to take care of you the way you've taken care of us. Claire stood up slowly, moving to where he stood by the window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that reflected the moonlight. And if I said yes? She asked quietly. Then, we'd do this right, Jake said. A proper wedding, with the girls as witnesses, and the whole town invited if you want. Legal papers that make you their stepmother, and my wife in every way that matters. A partnership where your voice carries equal weight in decisions about our family and our future. Claire reached out and took his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. I never thought I'd have a family of my own, she said. I'd convinced myself that taking care of other people's children was enough, that I didn't need anything more permanent. And now I know the difference between caring for children and loving them as your own, between having a job and having a home, between surviving alone and building something beautiful with someone else. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. Yes, Jake Morrison, I'll marry you. I'll be your partner and your wife and the mother your daughters deserve. Jake felt a smile spread across his face, the first truly uninhibited smile he'd experienced since Sarah's death. He leaned down and kissed Claire gently, sealing their commitment with the tenderness of two people who had found unexpected love in practical circumstances. From upstairs came the sound of a door opening and small feet hitting the floor. Lucy appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, having clearly been listening from her bedroom. Does this mean Claire gets to stay forever now? She called down hopefully. Jake and Claire looked at each other and laughed, the sound echoing through the house that had finally become a home again. Yes, sweetheart, Claire called back. Forever and always. As spring arrived, and they planned their simple wedding ceremony, Jake reflected on the unexpected way his life had changed. He had offered Claire shelter and employment out of practical necessity, never imagining that she would offer him something far more valuable in return. Love, partnership, and the restoration of his family's wholeness had emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, with Emma and Lucy serving as flower girls, and the entire community of Millfield gathered to witness the union. As Jake and Claire exchanged vows under the big sky of Montana, surrounded by the people who had supported them through difficult times, he understood Jake spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about his idea before he worked up the courage to act on it. Each morning he looked at Emma struggling to make breakfast while Lucy sat patiently waiting, and each evening he watched his youngest daughter search every room of the house as if her mother might suddenly appear. The rational part of his mind insisted that approaching Claire Williams with his proposal was foolish, impulsive, and likely to end in embarrassment. The practical part of his mind, however, recognized an opportunity that could solve multiple problems at once. On Sunday morning, he dressed the girls in their best church clothes and drove into town earlier than usual. Instead of heading straight to the white clapboard building where the congregation of Millfield Community Church gathered each week, he made a detour to Highway 12 and the Sunset Motel. The establishment looked even more depressing in daylight than he remembered, with its peeling paint and half-broken neon sign. "Why are we stopping here, Daddy?" Emma asked, looking confused as Jake parked in front of the motel office. "I need to talk to someone," Jake replied, suddenly, wondering if this was a terrible mistake. You girls wait in the truck. I'll just be a minute. The motel clerk, a tired-looking man with stained clothes and suspicious eyes, regarded Jake with obvious distrust. We don't usually get folks in Sunday clothes around here, he said. You looking for a room? I'm looking for one of your guests. Claire Williams. Could you tell me which room she's in? The clerk's expression grew even more wary. Can't give out information about guests. Motel policy. Jake sighed, understanding the man's caution but frustrated nonetheless. Could you at least tell her that Jake Morrison would like to speak with her? The man with the 2 daughters from the general store? After a long moment, the clerk shrugged. I can ask. Wait here. Through the truck's windshield, Jake could see Emma watching him with curiosity while Lucy played with one of her new hair ribbons. He wondered what Sarah would think of what he was about to do. Would she approve of his unconventional solution, or would she be horrified that he was willing to enter into such a practical arrangement? The office door opened, and Claire emerged, looking surprised and slightly concerned. She wore the same faded jeans from the general store, but she'd added a clean white blouse that made her look more presentable despite her circumstances. Jake? Is everything all right? Is one of the girls hurt? No, everyone's fine. Jake assured her quickly, removing his hat. I was wondering if I could talk to you for a few minutes. There's something I'd like to discuss. Claire glanced toward the truck where Emma and Lucy were visible, then back at Jake with obvious curiosity. Of course. Would you like to come in, or... Actually, I was hoping we could take a drive. Maybe grab some coffee at the diner? I promise it's nothing inappropriate. You could bring the girls if that makes you more comfortable. Something in his earnest expression must have convinced her, because Claire nodded. Let me get my jacket. 10 minutes later, they were seated in a corner booth at Miller's Diner while Emma and Lucy shared a plate of pancakes at a nearby table. The Sunday morning crowd was thin, mostly elderly couples reading newspapers and drinking coffee. Jake ordered for both of them, then found himself struggling to begin the conversation he'd rehearsed dozens of times in his head. This is probably going to sound strange, he started, then stopped, looking out the window at the empty street. Try me, Claire said gently. I've heard plenty of strange things lately. Jake took a deep breath and decided to be completely direct. I know we've only met once, but I've been thinking about your situation and mine, and I have a proposition that might benefit both of us. Claire raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. You need a place to stay, and I need help with my daughters. Not just the day-to-day care, but the things I don't know how to provide. The mother things, hair ribbons and proper braids, and knowing when they need new clothes or how to talk to them about girl problems. Jake paused, realizing how inadequate his words sounded. I'm not talking about charity, and I'm not talking about anything romantic. I'm talking about a practical arrangement that could work for everyone. Claire studied his face carefully. What kind of arrangement exactly? You could live at the ranch. There's a spare bedroom that's plenty comfortable, and you'd have your privacy. In exchange, you'd help with the girls and maybe some of the household tasks. I'd pay you a fair wage for your time, plus room and board. Think of it as a live-in position, like a nanny or housekeeper, but more comprehensive. The words hung between them while Claire processed what he was suggesting. Jake watched her expressions change from surprise to consideration to something that might have been relief. You're offering me a job, she said slowly. I'm offering you a home, Jake corrected. And a purpose if you want it. Those girls need someone who understands them in ways I never will, no matter how hard I try. And from what I saw at the store, you have natural instincts with children. Claire glanced over at Emma and Lucy, who were giggling over their shared breakfast, and completely oblivious to the adult conversation happening nearby. They're wonderful children, she admitted. And you're right that they need feminine guidance. But, Jake, you don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. You could be, Jake agreed. But you're not. You spent your own time helping my daughters with something as simple as hair ribbons, and you didn't expect anything in return. You listened to Lucy talk about missing her mama without getting uncomfortable or changing the subject. And when Emma asked you to show her the braiding technique again, you did it patiently, like teaching her mattered to you. Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, Jake saw tears threatening in her eyes. I lost my job 3 weeks ago, she said quietly. The family I worked for in Denver decided they didn't need a nanny anymore, and they let me go with 2 weeks' notice. I've been driving around ever since, looking for work, trying to make my savings last until I find something. The motel takes most of what I have left. What kind of work were you doing? Childcare mostly. I have experience with children from infancy through school age. I also did light housekeeping and meal preparation. Before that, I worked at a daycare center for 3 years. Claire hesitated, then continued. I don't have family to fall back on. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, and I've been on my own ever since. Jake felt a familiar pang of recognition. He understood the weight of carrying responsibility alone, of making decisions without anyone to share the burden. I'm sorry, that's a hard road. It is, Claire agreed. But it's taught me to be self-sufficient and to appreciate genuine kindness when I find it. She looked at him directly. Is this really just about the girls needing a woman's influence? The question caught Jake off guard with its perceptiveness. He considered giving her a simple answer, but something about Claire's straightforward manner demanded honesty. Partly, he admitted. But it's also about me needing help I'm too proud to ask for from the church ladies or the neighbors. They mean well, but their help comes with expectations and opinions I'm not ready to deal with. You'd be an employee, not a charity case. And I'd be your employer, not a project to fix up. Claire nodded slowly. And the girls? How would you explain my presence to them? The truth, that I hired you to help take care of them, and the house. Emma's old enough to understand practical arrangements, and Lucy just wants someone who'll braid her hair and read her bedtime stories. What about the town? People will talk. Jake almost smiled. People already talk. About how those poor Morrison children need a mother figure, about how I'm not managing well on my own, about how I should remarry for the girls' sake. At least this way, the talk will be about something that's actually helping my daughters instead of speculating about my personal life. Claire considered this, then asked the question Jake had been dreading. How long would this arrangement last? What happens if you decide to remarry? Or if I find other opportunities? We'd figure it out as we go, Jake said honestly. Nothing in life comes with guarantees, Claire. But right now, today, you need a place to live, and I need help raising my daughters. Everything else we can handle when it happens. Emma appeared beside their table, looking polite, but determined. Excuse me, Daddy, but Lucy needs to use the bathroom. And I think Miss Claire should know that Lucy sometimes needs help with the soap dispenser because she's not tall enough. Jake looked at Claire, who was already standing up. I'll take her, Claire offered naturally. Emma, would you like to come too? As Jake watched the three of them walk toward the back of the diner, Emma explaining Lucy's various bathroom preferences while Lucy skipped along between them, he felt something settle in his chest. This felt right in a way that surprised him with its intensity. When they returned, Lucy climbed onto the bench beside Claire instead of going back to her own table. Miss Claire, do you know any songs? Daddy doesn't remember the words to most songs, but Mama used to sing them to me. Claire glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. I know a few songs, she told Lucy. Do you have a favorite? The one about the sunshine and the rain, Lucy said hopefully. To Jake's amazement, Claire knew exactly what song Lucy meant and began humming a gentle melody that he vaguely remembered Sarah singing. Lucy beamed and started humming along, while Emma listened with the serious expression she wore when trying to memorize something important. I have to go back to Denver to collect my things and settle some business there, Claire said suddenly, looking at Jake. But if your offer is genuine, I could be back by the end of the week. Jake felt relief flood through him. It's genuine. The job, the room, the fair wage, all of it. Then, I accept, Claire said simply. And Jake? Thank you for giving me a chance when you didn't have to. As they prepared to leave the diner, Lucy tugged on Claire's jacket. Are you coming to live with us? For real? Yes, sweetheart. If that's okay with you. Lucy threw her arms around Claire's waist in an impromptu hug that made Claire's eyes water again. Emma, more reserved but equally pleased, simply nodded her approval. Driving back to the ranch that afternoon, Jake listened to his daughters chatter excitedly about all the things they would show Miss Claire when she came to live with them. For the first time in 3 years, the silence in the truck felt comfortable instead of empty. And, for the first time since Sarah's death, Jake allowed himself to hope that his family might actually be okay. The autumn wind swept across the Montana plains, carrying with it the scent of dried grass and the promise of a harsh winter ahead. Jake Morrison stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, watching his two young daughters play in the yard below. 8-year-old Emma chased her 5-year-old sister Lucy around the old oak tree, their laughter echoing across the empty landscape. But Jake's heart felt anything but light. 3 years had passed since Sarah died, and every day felt like a battle he was losing. The ranch demanded constant attention, the cattle needed tending, and winter preparations were already behind schedule. Most challenging of all were Emma and Lucy, who needed so much more than he could give them. Emma had started doing her own hair in the mornings, creating lopsided braids that broke his heart. Lucy still asked for her mama every night before bed, and Jake never knew what to say. The general store in town had become his lifeline for basic necessities, though Mrs. Henderson, who ran it off and gave him pitying looks when he bought yet another package of frozen dinners. The church ladies had offered help countless times, but their assistance came with knowing glances and whispered conversations about how those poor children needed a mother figure. Jake appreciated their concern, but he valued his independence too much to accept charity that felt like judgment. That particular Thursday morning started like any other. Jake loaded Emma and Lucy into his pickup truck for the weekly trip to town. Emma sat in the middle, carefully holding Lucy's hand while Lucy pressed her nose against the window, fogging it up with her breath and drawing pictures in the condensation. The drive took 30 minutes along winding country roads, past abandoned farmhouses and overgrown fields that told stories of families who had given up and moved away. Main Street in Millfield looked the same as it had for decades. The hardware store, the diner, the post office, and Henderson's general store lined one side of the street, while the bank, the library, and the small medical clinic occupied the other. Jake parked in front of the general store and helped his daughters out of the truck. Emma immediately took charge of Lucy, straightening her little sister's coat and wiping a smudge from her cheek. Inside the store, Jake grabbed a shopping cart and began his usual routine. Milk, bread, eggs, whatever vegetables looked fresh enough to last the week. The girls wandered the aisles, Emma reading cereal box labels to Lucy and explaining which ones had too much sugar. Jake watched them from the corner of his eye, marveling at how grown-up Emma had become and worrying about whether that was fair to her. As he reached for a bag of flour on the top shelf, he noticed someone else struggling with the same task nearby. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, stretched unsuccessfully toward a container of oatmeal. She wore faded jeans, scuffed boots, and a jacket that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there was something about her determined expression that caught his attention. "Need some help with that?" Jake asked, stepping closer. She turned, and he saw exhaustion in her brown eyes, though she managed a grateful smile. "That would be wonderful, thank you. I'm not exactly built for reaching high shelves." Jake easily retrieved the oatmeal and handed it to her. "Jake Morrison," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat. "Claire Williams," she replied, shifting a small basket to her other arm. "I don't think I've seen you around town before. I live about 20 miles out on a cattle ranch. Don't get to town much except for supplies." He gestured toward Emma and Lucy, who were now examining a display of colorful hair ribbons. "Those are my daughters, Emma and Lucy." Claire's expression softened as she looked at the girls. "They're beautiful, and so well-behaved." "They're good kids," Jake agreed, though he heard the weariness in his own voice. "Lost their mother a few years back, so it's just the three of us now." Something flickered across Claire's face, an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify. Sympathy, perhaps, but also something deeper. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. Before Jake could respond, Lucy came running over, tugging on his coat sleeve. "Daddy, can we get the pretty ribbons? Emma said they might make my braids look better." Jake looked down at his youngest daughter's hopeful face, then at the display of colorful hair accessories. He had no idea how to choose appropriate ribbons for a 5-year-old, and the helplessness he felt in such moments always hit him like a physical blow. He started, then stopped, unsure. "Those blue ones would be perfect with your eyes," Claire said gently, kneeling down to Lucy's level. "And maybe some yellow ones too. Yellow is a happy color." Lucy beamed up at this stranger who understood about ribbons and happy colors. Do you think so? Emma tries to do my hair, but it never looks like the other girls at church. Claire glanced up at Jake, asking silent permission before turning back to Lucy. Would you like me to show you how to braid it with ribbons? I used to help my little sister when she was about your age. Really? Lucy's eyes lit up with pure joy. Daddy, can she? Jake found himself nodding, though part of him felt strange about accepting help from someone he'd just met. But Lucy's excitement was infectious, and Emma had wandered over, looking intrigued by the possibility of learning proper hair braiding techniques. Claire selected several ribbons from the display and added them to Jake's cart. Then, right there in the middle of Henderson's general store, she knelt behind Lucy and began working magic with the child's fine blonde hair. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, incorporating the blue ribbon into a neat braid that actually looked like something a mother might have done. See how I'm weaving the ribbon through? Claire explained to Emma, who watched with intense concentration. You want to keep the tension even, but not so tight that it pulls. Emma nodded seriously, clearly filing away every instruction for future use. Jake watched this impromptu lesson and felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time someone had taken such gentle, natural care with his daughters? When had anyone bothered to teach Emma the practical skills that Sarah would have passed on? There, Claire said, securing the end of the braid with a small elastic. What do you think? Lucy ran to the small mirror near the cosmetics display and gasped with delight. It's so pretty. Emma, look. Emma examined her sister's hair with approval. That's much better than when I do it. Could you show me again? Of course, Claire said, starting to unbraid Lucy's hair to demonstrate the technique once more. As Jake watched this scene unfold, he became aware of Mrs. Henderson observing from behind the counter. The older woman's expression held the same knowing look she'd given him for months, but this time it seemed less pitying and more thoughtful. Other customers in the store had noticed too, he realized, though their attention felt different somehow. Claire finished the second demonstration and stood up, brushing dust from her knees. There you go. Practice makes perfect, and I'm sure you'll have beautiful braids figured out in no time. Thank you so much, Emma said with genuine gratitude. Nobody ever showed me the right way before. The simple statement hit Jake harder than he expected. How many other right ways were his daughters missing out on? How many small, important things was he failing to provide simply because he didn't know what he didn't know? You're very welcome, Claire replied, then looked at Jake. They're lovely girls. You should be proud. I am, Jake said, and meant it completely. But I'm also, well, I'm figuring things out as I go. Claire nodded with understanding. We all are, I think. They completed their shopping in companionable conversation. Claire asked about the ranch, and Jake found himself describing the daily routines, the challenges of the upcoming winter, the satisfaction of working the land his grandfather had homesteaded. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about cattle management and crop rotation that surprised him. When Claire mentioned that she was new to the area and still looking for permanent housing, Jake's protective instincts kicked in. Where are you staying now? The motel out on Highway 12, she admitted. It's adequate for now, but I can't afford it much longer. I'm hoping something more permanent will turn up soon. Jake knew the motel she meant. It was a rundown place that rented rooms by the week to people who had nowhere else to go. The thought of this kind woman, who had just spent her time helping his daughters, staying in such a place bothered him more than he cared to examine. They parted ways in the parking lot, with Lucy insisting on showing her pretty new braid to everyone they passed. Emma walked beside Jake, unusually quiet, and he suspected she was thinking about the hair braiding lesson and all the other skills she was trying to learn on her own. The drive home gave Jake time to think. Claire Williams seemed like a decent person who had fallen on hard times. She was patient with children, practical in her approach to problems, and there had been something in her eyes that suggested she understood loss and hardship. Most importantly, she had treated his daughters with natural kindness, without the careful, artificial attention that often came from people who felt sorry for the motherless Morrison family. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Jake sat on his porch and looked out over his land. The ranch house felt too quiet, as it always did after dark. Sarah used to fill the evenings with conversation about their day, plans for tomorrow, dreams for their children's futures. Now the silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. He thought about Claire Williams, alone in that shabby motel room. He thought about Emma trying so hard to be the little mother she should never have to be. He thought about Lucy asking every night when Mama was coming home. And, slowly, an idea began to form in his mind. It was practical, straightforward, and potentially beneficial for everyone involved. It was also completely crazy. But, as Jake Morrison had learned over the past 3 years, sometimes crazy ideas were the only ones that made any sense at all.